back over what this Asia Brewers Network technical series presentation is brought to you in partnership with Hopsteiner, quality hops since 1845. Today's session will be presented by Mathis Geserer, brewmaster of Hopsteiner's Pilot Brewery, where he plans and performs brewing trials. He'll be discussing practical approaches to combining different hop dosages to match bitter and aroma profiles with their corresponding beer styles. So Mathis, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Hello, everybody. Glad to meet you today. I'm trying to start my presentation. Did it work, Charles?
Yep, you're on.
Great. So let's start that. I'm Mathis Geserer. Thanks, Charles, for the introduction. I'm the brewmaster of Hopsteiner's Research Brewery. Going to give you a short 20-minute presentation about dosing, hop dosing and beer styles. Considerations for the hopping of certain beer styles. That's the topic I'm going to talk about today. So today's agenda is how to hop a beer true to the style. There's some considerations to be made. First of all, you have to dose the right product at the right time, obviously. Not every product or every base or standard product is suitable to be used at every point of dosage throughout the process. That leads us to the next step. We have to identify points of dosage in the brewing process. When are we able to bring in hops? When are we able to bring in flavor, bitterness, aroma? Which dosage is suitable for which purpose? And then we need to know which standard products are suitable for which point of dosage. So that all comes together. And yeah, we're going to have a look at that. Afterwards, I'm going to give you suggestions for hopping lager beers. I'm going to look at two different lager styles and two different IPA styles as the flagship. I mean, IPA is still kind of flagship of the craft beer movement. So I guess it's a good style to be played through regarding the hopping. On this slide, we will have a look at the points of dosage. Obviously, we can add hops to the kettle, be it as a pre-wort dosage or begin mid throughout the whole boil. You can always add hops in the kettle. You can also add hops in the whirlpool, depending on what you aim for. Either you just hop it into the hot whirlpool directly after knockout, or you cool down the whirlpool. We will get to why you should do that in certain, for certain styles. You should definitely go for dip hopping or cooled down whirlpool dosage. The last point of addition that you could use in the hot part of the brewery is between whirlpool or whatever drop filtration system you have and the cooler. It's very, very distributed in the UK, for example. They have a lot of hopbacks. Hopback is kind of like a tank where you put in and you have a sieve in there, and you can put in pellets or cones or whatever. So it is a closed system. You go in with the hot wort, you have a closed system, so you don't evaporate too much of aroma while still having some isomerization in there, and then you go straight to the cooler. So you can add a lot of aroma in such a hopback. It's always a question of design, so you don't block it before the cooler. And yeah, it's a bit tricky, but kind of a nice approach to a late addition. Then we're getting to the cold part of the brewery. Obviously, you can dry hop throughout the whole main fermentation process. You can dry hop throughout the whole lagering process. You should combine these for different style approaches. That's something we're going to talk about with the IPA. And on top of maturation dosage, lagering dosage, you also could dry hop kind of prior to filtration. That works with hop oils. I'm going to talk about the usage shortly, at least, of our Hopsteiner hop oil range, when to use which product. So that's the last point of addition, where you actually bring in hops, at least with standard products, if we're not talking about specialized products. So how to hop a beer true to the style. We're going to talk about suitable products now. As already mentioned, standard products. I'm not going to get into too much into detail with the 20 minutes I have. In the hop part of the brewery, we can work with raw hops, pellets, talking T45, T90, whatever. Hop flow, which is a CO2 extract. I mean, CO2 extract, everybody knows CO2 extract. We also have total resin extract, which is ethanol-based extract. And hop flow is a product that is based on a CO2 extract, but pourable at room temperature. You get like little bottles, you can open them, pour out what you need for one brew, and then just reseal them and put them back in the fridge. For basic CO2 or ethanol extract, you won't need dosing pumps or other systems and preheating systems to make them pourable. So hop flow is just a convenience product, more or less. So everybody could use extract and therefore reduce their beer losses in the whirlpool, for example. Mid to end of boil, we're gonna get we only gonna use raw hops, pellets of any kind, but no extract anymore. I'm gonna get back to that in 1 to 2 slides why we don't use extract in mid of the boil. In the whirlpool, again, I'd go for only pellets. You could obviously use raw hops, but to get rid of them without sucking them into your cooling system could be a bit hard. So in the whirlpool, let's stay with pellets. And in the hop bag, as mentioned before, you could either use raw hops or pellets. In some system, you could use both. If you change the sieve, it's always depending on the mesh size of the sieve, which kind of product you could use in your hop bag. There are products now that could be used as hop guns as well, or hop guns, hop torpedoes, whatever they're called. In the cold part of the brewery, as well as in the hot part, there's mobile systems which you could just kind of bypass, build into your beer stream as a bypass, and therefore use them in both parts of the brewery. Getting to the cold part of the brewery, during main fermentation, so we're talking about dry hopping now, you could either use raw hops, you could use pellets, you could use hop oils. In Hopsteiner's case, it's type dry. Type dry is a hop oil that resembles the natural composition of hop oils in hops. It is available as a generic product from, it is as a generic product or as a variety-specific product. If you want to add variety-specific top notes, for example, you could use hop oils type dry. If you use it in the beginning of main fermentation, that will change your impression of the hop oil. Intensely, there will be a lot of changes going on. It will not be the intense in your face taste, but sometimes it makes sense to kind of shift your aroma by adding hop oils in the beginning of fermentation or throughout main fermentation. All of those products might be used as well during lagering or maturation. I mean, if you try to avoid beer losses, if we're talking about big dry hopping dosages, you always talk about beer losses as well. I mean, we're talking about up to 30%, depending on the dosage that you put in there. You could use up to 30% of your finished beer by dry hopping, simply by dry hopping. Maybe raw hops aren't the best opportunity to dry hop. If you intensely dry hop, or at least if you're statically dry hopping with dynamic systems, you could use pellets or raw hops as well, because you could bring down beer losses with those extra extra constructions. But not everybody has a hop gun or anything alike, and a lot of guys have to dry hop loose. So at least go for pellets. You could go for T45, you could go for lupulin enriched pellets, whatever, to lower your beer losses. Or partially use hop oils. I would not go for a only hop oil beer that is dry hopped only with hop oils, because that could be a bit artificial in the taste, but you can always use hop oils as a support for your hop aroma, for adding top notes and stuff like that onto your beer, or giving the final kick to your beer. And yeah, therefore you avoid some beer losses at least. Then we have downstream pre-filter. We talked about that in the big page before. There we have other hop oils that might be used downstream or pre-filter. That's hop oil type Noble and Noble Plus. That's the Hopsteiner products designed for that purpose. They're not resembling the natural composition of hop oils, but instead are standardized to linalool contents. Hop oil type Noble is standardized to 10% linalool. Noble Plus is standardized to 20% linalool. Yeah, the aroma giving component is more or less the linalool or terpene alcohols that come with it. Big plus is it does not get caught in the filter. That's why you can dose it straight before the filter, because you will yield most of the dosed hop oil in the finished beer. Here's a short overview on some guide values for isomerization yield. That's why we don't use extracts from mid of boil on. If you look at the boiling time, we're starting with, if we have a standard boiling time of 70 minutes, extract is way better in yield than pellets are. You see that in the first column here. But if we move further on throughout the boil and end up with, for example, 45 minutes, then the yield is already slightly worse than with pellets, and that continues throughout the rest of the boil. So if you intend to use extracts for bittering purposes, use them in the beginning of the boil and add pellets in the end of the boil. In the whirlpool, we usually only use pellets, so that's why I added the only pellet yields here. If you use pellets in the hot whirlpool, you can calculate with 8 up to 12% of iso-alpha yield. If you cool it down to around 80-85 degrees, you can calculate with approximately 1.5 to 3% iso-alpha yield. So you can add vast amounts of hops in the whirlpool as long as the composition and the construction of your whirlpool allows it to add such amount of hops without any unpleasant bittering or too much of unpleasant bittering. I've done beers with like 90% of the hopping in the whirlpool. Yeah, simply by cooling it down, that kind of works well. First suggestion for hopping a beer is a lager. So we're going to have a look at a key data for example, a Helles. That's a German style, Munich style Helles all malt beer. Original gravity is 11 to 13 degree Plato, alcohol around 5%, IBUs 15 to 20, 25, something like that. Color 8 to 11 EBC, mid to high attenuated beers. So there's a hop is more or less a side notice. You could add like a slight aroma dosage in the end or something like that, but usually Munich Helles is not really a hoppy beer. So how to hop it? That's yeah, I've always heard guys just I take a bitter dosage in the beginning of the brew. It's all about the malt character. Yes, malt character dominates the beer style, but you could add a counterweight by adjusting bitter profile and aroma profile through hopping. So bitter profile of a Helles, classic Helles, is almost no perceptible to slight bitterness. It's living from a malty body. You have like a rest extract going on that kind of covers all bitterness you bring in. But you could shift that regarding the aroma. A classic Munich Helles doesn't really show any big hop aroma. It's very reserved, almost non-existent. But again, you could add top notes. How to hop such a beer? Well, usually you could go up to 100% of the target IBUs in the beginning of the boils, but that's not what I recommend. I would go for around 50% in the beginning of the boil and add optional dosages of either extract or pellets. I mean, you could do extract dosage in the beginning to do 50% of the target IBUs, and then split the rest of the target IBUs to 30 and 20% for mid-boil and end of boil. Those will be done with pellets then, or maybe raw hops or whatever you would like to take. I would just not use extracts as discussed before. The maltier the profile of a beer and the lower the final attenuation, the higher target IBUs might be approached, and the broader the bitter profile might be set up. So if you have a very strong malty helles, an intense malty beer, you could add like 20, sometimes even 25 IBUs without any significant bitter impression in the beer. It will just get rounder and smoother to drink, because the bitterness is still covered by the malt body and by the sweetness. So we're trending to 20 for some malty helles. We're trending to 20 to 25 IBUs. The bittering profile might be affected by splitting bittering into 3 dosages throughout the boil to get a broad but smooth bitter profile. Work 50-50, begin to mid of boil. You could switch that to 80-20, for example, for a lean but accentuated bitter profile. That's something that works quite well. You could, and if you would like to have some hop aroma to kind of give a counterweight to the malt aroma in there, or add a slight aroma note on top of all of that, you could also do like the 50-30-20, begin to mid to end of boil ratio, or even go to dosage in the whirlpool of like 20 or 30% of the target IBU. Since we're talking about, I guess I'm talking to mostly Asian brewers right now, maybe Munich Helles is not the best target beer, so I tried my approach on an international lager as well. Again, we could use the same target, the same distribution. It's kind of the same approach, or the same base info we have, how to approach it, but we will go different ways by trending to lower IBUs. We're talking about a lean lager, sometimes containing rice, or mostly containing partial at least of the malt bill, rice, corn, sugar, whatever. We have always, or often have high attenuated beers, no big malt body, no sweetness left, final attenuation apparent of around 85 or 83%. So there's not much sweetness to catch up with the bitterness that your hop dosages might bring in. So the leaner the beer and the leaner the malt body, the less you should go with the IBUs. I would recommend to use pellets with novel aroma varieties. You could obviously go for extract dosage in the beginning of the boil and just stay there, or you split it and therefore give a smoother bitterness to your beer. It's often a very one-dimensional if you only go for a dosage in the beginning of the boil, and to add width and broth to your bitterness, split it to 2 or 3 dosages throughout the boil. That always helps. If we're talking about IPAs, I mean, first thing that comes into my mind is West Coast IPA. It's a classic. That's how I got, that was more or less my first contact with the US craft brewing scene. We have key data of original gravity around 45 to 18 degree plateau. Alcohol levels from 5.5 to 7.58, sometimes 9% by volume if we're going for imperial IPAs or stuff like that. High IBU rate, color is very flat. Yeah, you're very free on the choosing of your color. Yeah. And we have mid to high attenuated beers. So you have a hop bitterness, or an intense hop bitterness that meets a malty body. And by goes well with the intense dry hop derived aroma. So we have a lot of everything in this beer style, and we have to find a ratio to work with it. So we have a strong, distinctive, full-bodied bitterness. We have an intense aroma profile, typical display of the utilized hop variety. So that's what we aim for in the dry hopping. We want to have a typical display of the utilized hop variety or varieties. And it might, that might be everything from resinous and spicy to fruit bombs to citrusy, whatever. So my suggestion for the regime would be go for 50 to 80 IBU in a ratio of begin, mid, end of boil. Again, we have this 50, 30, 20 ratio. I'm a big fan of that. It works with pretty much every beer style, depending on the overall IBUs you bring in there. That's what you have to adjust to the beer style, more or less. How much IBU would you like to bring in there? How big is your malt body? And then adjust the IBU according to it. And then you can think about how to split it. Sometimes I take 50, 30, 20 and add another top-notch whirlpool, but a cooled down whirlpool, so it doesn't affect the IBUs more or less. Then you have 1 to 2 dosages of 500 to 1,500 gram per hectoliter each. I mean, 1,500 gram is a lot, but yeah, I've done more already. Always have to take care that you can avoid hop creep, or that you have enough lagering time to get out the hop burn of high dosages always cause like a peppery burn in your mouth, and that usually goes away over time. So you have to consider having more lagering time for the finalized beer if you add high dosages throughout the dry hopping. By avoiding biotransformation, so we have no big dosage in the beginning of the fermentation. We only dry hop mid to end of main fermentation, or in the final attenuated beer. The final attenuated beer dosage in this case is obligatory, and you could add on top of that like a dosage throughout any point in main fermentation to shift your aroma to a more fruity and citrusy side. If you go for a variety specific aroma in your beer, always go for the dosage into the final attenuated beer that will be as close as you could get to the raw hop impression, which you get like when you do a rub with that hop, and that's the impression. To reach this impression of a hop rub, always go for the dosage in the final attenuated beer. By avoiding this biotransformation, as already said, and the CO2 washing out the terpenes in the aroma profile, it ends up closer to the raw hop impression. So you have the CO2 of the main fermentation washing out aroma as well. That also shifts the aroma if you do early main fermentation dosages. Now let's have a look at an IPA or a Juicy IPA. Here we have like actually it's the counterpart to a West Coast IPA. You have almost no perceptible bitterness compared to an IPA. We're not going for 50, 80 IBUs. We're going for like 20, maybe 40 IBUs. Analytical and sensoric, sensory IBUs are even less. So what do we do here? We want an intense, juicy hop aroma, but we don't want bitterness. So usually I start with a begin of boil dosage of around 10% of the target IBUs, and mainly, that's mainly to avoid foam in the kettle and to help with, getting rid of the proteins throughout the boil, so they can flocculate and be caught out in the whirlpool. And we do a big whirlpool dosage. Our best practice, for now at least, was to go down to around 85 degrees. That's enough. You don't have to cool much further down, and there you add everything in IBUs of the target IBUs which you didn't add in the beginning of the boil. So considering a yield of, or IC alpha yield of around 1 to max 3%, you can add loads of hops and therefore bring in vast aroma. That is followed, so you already have a strong geraniol linalool body from use geraniol strong or geraniol rich varieties for this dosage in the whirlpool. That will help with biotransformation later on. You could add 2 to 3 dosages of 5 to 1,500 or even more gram per hectoliter each during dry hopping. Obligatory in this case is not the dosage after fermentation, but the one in during fermentation. You could either work like 1 to 2 to 3 days into main fermentation when you're like at 20 to 30% of final attenuation apparent. Then you could add your first dosage. I would avoid dry hopping before the yeast is done with reproducing and before anaerobic fermentation starts. That might cause serious microbiological problems. So always allow the yeast to start its work, its anaerobic work, and then add your first dosage of depending on intensity of the aroma you would like to have, 5 to whatever gram per hectoliter. Always, as with the whirlpool dosage, it does make sense to use geraniol-rich varieties due to the possibility of biotransformation from geraniol to linalool, citronellol, and shifting your aroma impression of your Nipa to a more fruity and juicy and citrusy side. On top of that, you could add dosages in the end of main fermentation, a second one, and in the final attenuated be a third one. By that, you can add more and more resinous or spicy or whatever notes on top of that beer, depending on what your final wished impression is. Already mentioned the geraniol and linalool rich varieties. My approach would be to go for we have some varieties now that are pretty suitable to be used in there, such as Sultana or Lotus. They're very well for being used in Nipas or Juicy IPAs. I'm currently working on some with a new German variety, which is called Solero, which is very suitable as well. So I hope that was that was a nice overview of how we approach our hopping regimes. Looking forward to your questions now, and would like to thank you for your kind attention. And let's see what your questions are.
Thank you, Mathis. Thank you very much for the presentation. Our technical session recording will end here. Please be sure to check out our other recordings on the Asia Brewers Network website and YouTube channel.